"You stain my shirt," the rancher joked. The Apache beauty pouted, and they both burst out laughing. Jake had been working on the ranch for as long as he could remember. The dry Arizona heat was something he had grown used to. He spent his days tending to cattle, repairing fences, and taking care of everything that came with the life of a rancher. He didn't mind the solitude. For years, he had worked alone, building his life in the vast, empty land. The ranch was his world, and that was how he liked it. It wasn't a life for everyone, but Jake didn't need much. A roof over his head, a bed to sleep in, and enough work to keep him busy was all he required. He wasn't a man of many words, and the quiet suited him. The days blended into one another, and time seemed to stretch endlessly under the blazing sun. One morning, as Jake made his way to the nearby river to fetch water for the cattle, something unusual caught his eye. A figure was walking along the riverbank. It was a woman, but not just any woman. She stood out in the most remarkable way. Her skin was darker than most people Jake had seen, and her black hair flowed behind her like a river itself, glistening in the sunlight. She carried herself with a grace that immediately made her noticeable. Jake couldn't help but watch her from a distance. She seemed to glide through the landscape, her eyes focused on something far ahead. As she got closer, Jake realized she was picking wildflowers and herbs, carefully placing them into a woven basket. There was something about the way she moved, something so fluid and effortless, that it made her seem as though she were part of the land itself. She hadn't noticed him at first. Jake thought about turning around and walking back to his chores, but something kept him rooted to the spot. It wasn't until she looked up and their eyes met that the moment truly shifted. Her dark eyes locked with his, and for a brief second they just stared at each other. Neither said a word, but in that moment there was an unspoken understanding between them. Something that felt both natural and mysterious, as if they were two strangers who were somehow meant to cross paths. The woman gave him a slight nod, acknowledging his presence. Jake, being the quiet man he was, nodded back, though he couldn't find any words to say. She didn't seem to mind. With another swift motion, she bent down to gather more herbs and flowers, and Jake turned back to his water gathering. But there was something different in the air now. As Jake worked, he couldn't help but think about her. Her presence had unsettled him in a way he wasn't used to. He couldn't remember the last time he'd met someone who had such an effect on him. Sure, he'd met people in town now and then, but none of them had made him feel like this. There was something about her that seemed wild, free, and yet calm all at once. Over the next few days, Jake's routine stayed the same, but his mind was constantly drifting back to the woman he had seen by the river. Every time he went to fetch water, he kept an eye out for her, wondering if she would appear again. It wasn't long before he saw her again, and this time she was sitting by the water, carefully washing her hands. The sight of her, sitting so still and peaceful, drew Jake in. He found himself walking toward her again, but this time he was determined to speak. When he was just a few steps away, he cleared his throat. "You're out here often, aren't you?" he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. He wasn't used to talking much, but something about her made him want to break his silence. The woman looked up, surprised, but then gave him a small smile. "I come here when I need quiet," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "The river is always peaceful." Jake nodded, feeling a little awkward. He wasn't good with small talk, but the words came out anyway. "I'm Jake. I live over there on the ranch." The woman's eyes softened as she took in his words. "I'm Kaya," she said. "I live nearby with my family." "Kaya," Jake repeated, liking the way the name sounded on his tongue. It felt familiar, as if he had known her longer than just a few moments. "Do you come here every day?" Kaya nodded. "Most days. The land gives me what I need." Jake didn't know what to say next. He hadn't expected the conversation to flow so easily. But there was something in the way Kaya spoke, with such a calm certainty, that made him feel at ease. It wasn't like talking to anyone else. It was as if they were two people who understood each other without needing to say much at all. From that day on, their encounters by the river became more frequent. Every morning, Jake would head to the river to get water for the cattle, and Kaya would be there, either gathering herbs or sitting quietly by the water. They began to exchange more words, and soon, their brief conversations became longer. They spoke about their lives, their experiences, and the land around them. Kaya shared stories of her people, her Apache heritage, and the traditions she held dear. Jake, in turn, told her about his life as a rancher, the challenges he faced, and the hard work that went into maintaining the ranch. Despite their different backgrounds, they found common ground in their respect for the land. Kaya spoke of the earth's rhythms, how everything had its place in nature, while Jake spoke of the land's rugged beauty, its unforgiving nature, and the satisfaction that came from working it. It wasn't long before Jake began to look forward to his daily trips to the river. The work at the ranch hadn't changed, but now there was a sense of anticipation. He found himself thinking about Kaya even when she wasn't around. Her soft voice, her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled when she spoke, it all stayed with him long after their conversations ended. Kaya, too, seemed to enjoy their encounters. She would often smile when she saw Jake approaching, and her eyes would light up as she greeted him. It was clear that the rancher had become a part of her daily routine, and with each meeting, their bond grew stronger. They didn't need to talk all the time, but when they did, it felt as if the world slowed down around them. For Jake, it was a new experience. He had never been one for companionship, but Kaya was different. She didn't try to force anything. She didn't need him to be anyone but himself. And that was something Jake hadn't realized he was missing. She made him feel like he could simply be, without the need to prove anything. It wasn't just the words they exchanged, but the silence between them that spoke volumes. There was a comfort in the stillness, an understanding that neither of them had to explain themselves. They were two souls sharing the same space, connected by something deeper than words could express. As the days passed, the connection between Jake and Kaya continued to grow. It wasn't an immediate love, but it was something more subtle. It was respect, curiosity, and the beginnings of something neither of them could fully explain. And then, one afternoon, something changed. Jake was repairing a fence near the river when he saw Kaya walking toward him. She had a basket in her hand, and her face was set with a quiet determination. As she got closer, Jake saw something in her eyes, something more than just the usual calmness. He stopped what he was doing and watched as she approached. There was something different about her today, something that made the air feel heavier. "Jake," Kaya said when she reached him, "I need to tell you something." Jake felt his heart skip a beat. He had no idea what she was going to say, but he could tell it was important. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "My family is moving farther into the mountains where it's safer." Jake's heart sank. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't known how much he had come to care for her until that very moment. "Why?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "The settlers," Kaya said, her eyes lowering to the ground. "They're taking more land, pushing us further out." Jake nodded, his mind racing. He had known that things were getting tense between settlers and the native tribes, but hearing it from Kaya made it feel more real, more personal. "Will you be all right?" Jake asked, though the question felt too small for the situation. Kaya met his gaze again, and for a moment neither of them spoke. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength, a resilience, that made Jake believe she would be just fine. "I'll be fine," she said softly, and then with a small smile she added, "but I'll miss these quiet mornings by the river." Jake didn't know what to say. He had no words to fix the situation, no way to make her stay. All he could do was nod. He wanted to tell her that he'd help her, that he could protect her and her family, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, they simply stood there for a moment, the sound of the river rushing past them, the air filled with the weight of the unspoken. And in that moment, Jake realized how much he would miss her. He had always been a man of few words. someone who preferred the quiet of the land. But with Kaya, things felt different. He hadn't realized how much he had come to rely on their meetings by the river, the soft exchanges of words that made his days feel more meaningful. After their conversation, Jake found himself spending more time at the river, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He couldn't explain why, but there was a pull inside him, a need to see her again before she left. He didn't know what he would say to her, but he felt like he had to say something. It wasn't just the way she made him feel, calm, at ease, as if the world had slowed down when they were together. It was also the way she had made him question everything about his life. Her departure felt like a storm on the horizon, something that couldn't be stopped but would leave a lasting impact. Jake wasn't ready for that storm. One morning he woke up earlier than usual, the sun still low in the sky. His mind was restless, and his feet seemed to carry him toward the river without any real thought. When he arrived, he saw her there as he had hoped. She was sitting by the water's edge, her legs crossed and her hands folded in her lap. The basket of herbs was at her side, and the soft breeze was gently tugging at her hair, making it dance like the leaves of the trees nearby. Kaya looked up as she heard his footsteps, a small smile appearing on her lips when she saw him. Jake's heart skipped a beat, and he found himself at a loss for words. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to wanting to say something, to feeling the need to express something he couldn't fully understand. "I thought I might find you here," Jake said finally, his voice low and rough from disuse. Kaya nodded but didn't speak right away. She simply watched him with those dark, knowing eyes as if she could see straight into his thoughts. After a moment, she patted the ground beside her. "Sit with me." Jake hesitated for a second before walking over and sitting down beside her. The air was cool, but the warmth of the morning sun was beginning to creep in, casting a soft glow over everything. He sat there a few feet away from her, trying to find the right words. The river babbled beside them, the only sound breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I didn't expect you to come today," Kaya finally said, her voice soft but steady, like the river itself. "I thought you might be busy with the ranch." Jake looked over at her, feeling a sudden warmth spread across his chest. "I was, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." She tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to understand his words. "Which part?" she asked, her tone light, as though they were just continuing a conversation they had already started. "About leaving," Jake said, his voice rougher now. "I don't like the idea of you going." Kaya turned her gaze back to the river, her fingers absent-mindedly brushing the dirt from the side of her basket. "It's not something I want either, Jake," she said, her voice a little quieter now. "But it's what's best for my people. Things are changing and we have to adapt." Jake clenched his fists, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. He wasn't sure why, but hearing her talk about leaving made him feel powerless. He wanted to offer her something to make her stay, but he didn't have the right words. He wasn't even sure what he could offer her that would make any difference. "You don't have to go," Jake said, his voice more forceful now, though he wasn't sure what he was trying to convey. "You have a place here." Kaya's eyes met his again, and for a moment he thought he saw something flicker in her gaze, something almost tender but also distant. "It's not that simple, Jake," she said. "I have a responsibility to my people. My family needs me." Jake's heart sank. He understood what she was saying. He did. But it didn't make it any easier. He had never been someone who had to think about his family in the way she did. His life had always been about the ranch, the cattle, the land. But Kaya's life was about more than just herself. She had obligations to her people, her family, and the way she spoke about it made him realize just how much she carried on her shoulders. "I understand," Jake said quietly, his voice almost lost to the sound of the river. "But I wish things were different." Kaya let out a small sigh and turned her head back to the water. "I wish that too," she admitted, "but this is how it is. There's no changing it." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to hold its breath. the gentle rush of the river the only sound in the air. Jake couldn't help but feel as if this was a turning point, a moment that would change everything for him. He didn't know what to do with the feeling inside him, the feeling that he couldn't let her go, that he couldn't let this be the end of their connection. "I've never been good at saying goodbye," Jake said after a while, his voice barely above a whisper. Kaya turned to look at him, her expression softening. "We don't have to say goodbye yet," she said. "You'll still see me before I leave. I won't be gone forever." Jake looked at her, searching her face for any sign of doubt, any indication that she wasn't certain about her decision. But there was nothing. She had made up her mind, and there was no changing that. "I'll miss you, you know," Jake said, his words more honest than he had intended. "I'm not used to missing people, but I think I'll miss you more than I expected." Kaya smiled, a small, almost sad smile that tugged at something deep inside him. "I'll miss you too," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd find someone like you here, Jake." Jake didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't good with emotions or long speeches, but he knew, deep down, that this moment, this quiet exchange of feelings, was something he would carry with him forever. They sat there in silence for a while longer, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't just the words that had been spoken, but the quiet understanding they shared. Kaya's presence had become a part of his life, like the land itself. It was hard to imagine what life would be like without her now. As the morning wore on, Kaya stood up, brushing off the dirt from her skirt. "I need to get back to my family," she said, her voice steady again like it had been before. "But I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe we can talk more then." Jake stood up as well, his heart heavier than it had been before. "I'll be here," he said, his voice steady despite the way his insides felt like they were in turmoil. Kaya gave him one last smile before she turned and walked away, her footsteps soft against the earth. Jake watched her go, his chest tightening with each step she took. He knew that this might be the last time they would share such a quiet moment together, but he also knew that he would remember it, that it would stay with him long after she was gone. As she disappeared from view, Jake stood still for a moment longer, staring at the empty spot where she had been. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end. Not yet. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension. Jake couldn't help but feel that the time with Kaya was running out. It wasn't something he could explain, not to himself, and certainly not to her. The knowledge that she would be leaving soon hung heavy in the air, like a storm cloud waiting to break. He had always been someone who kept his emotions to himself, someone who was used to the quiet solitude of ranch life. But now, every part of his routine seemed to carry a deeper weight. He kept telling himself that he was being foolish. Kaya was doing what she had to do for her people, and he had no right to hold her back. He knew that, of course, but that didn't make it any easier. There was something about her, something about the way she looked at him, the way she spoke, the way she moved, that had burrowed itself into his heart, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake it. The mornings by the river had become a routine. He would go to the river to fetch water for the cattle, and Kaya would be there, either gathering herbs or sitting quietly by the water's edge. They didn't talk much. Their conversations were simple, the words often unimportant. It was the quiet moments they shared that meant the most. They sat together, side by side, as the sun rose and the world came alive around them. On one such morning, Jake arrived to find Kaya sitting on a large rock, her legs folded beneath her. She was staring out at the river, her expression distant, as though lost in thought. Jake hesitated for a moment before approaching, unsure of what to say. The air between them had shifted somehow. The easy camaraderie they had once shared felt fragile now, as though it could break with a single word. "Kaya," Jake called softly, breaking the silence. Kaya turned her head and smiled at him, but there was something in her eyes that wasn't quite right. It was as if the smile didn't reach her eyes, as if her mind was somewhere far away. Jake felt a pang in his chest as he took a step closer. "Are you all right?" Jake asked, his voice low and careful. Kaya nodded, but her eyes seemed distant, as though her thoughts were far beyond the river and the ranch. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice lacked its usual warmth. "Just thinking." Jake sat down beside her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. For the first time since they had met, there was a distance between them. He didn't know how to cross it, and he hated the feeling. "What are you thinking about?" Jake asked, trying to sound casual, though he was anything but. Kaya took a deep breath and looked out at the river again. "I'm thinking about my people," she said quietly, "about what's coming, about the future." Jake nodded, understanding. He knew how much her tribe meant to her. She had told him many times about her responsibility to her people, how they depended on her and her family for guidance. But hearing her speak about it now, with that distant look in her eyes, made him realize just how heavy that burden must be. "They're pushing us further out," Kaya continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "More settlers are coming, and we have nowhere else to go. We have to keep moving, keep adapting." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard stories about the tension between the settlers and the native tribes, but he had never fully understood the impact it had until now. Kaya's people weren't just fighting for their land, they were fighting for their way of life. And she too was caught in the middle, torn between the pull of her family and the land she loved, and the life she had come to build with him. "I wish I could do something," Jake said, his voice thick with frustration. "I wish I could help." Kaya turned to face him then, her eyes softening slightly. "You've already helped more than you know," she said. "Just by being here, by being kind. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect to find someone like you." Jake felt a rush of warmth spread through him at her words. He didn't know what he had done to deserve her kindness, but hearing her say that made him feel as though he had done something right, even if it was just by being himself. But the quiet between them returned, heavier now. Kaya's smile faded, and she looked back at the river. Jake could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers clenched the edges of her skirt. She was struggling with something, and he could feel it. He wanted to reach out, to take her hand and tell her everything would be okay, but he knew that wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for the world she lived in. "I don't want you to go," Jake said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Kaya didn't look at him. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the river, the water flowing endlessly past them. "I don't want to go either," she said, her voice tight. "But I have to, I have a duty." "I don't want to lose you," Jake admitted, his voice quieter now. "I don't want to say goodbye." Kaya finally turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, and for a moment Jake thought she might cry. But then she blinked, her eyes steady once more, and she spoke. "You don't have to lose me," Kaya said, her voice soft but firm. "We're not losing each other, we're just going in different directions for now." Jake looked at her, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean?" Kaya smiled again, a small, sad smile. "I'm not leaving forever," she said. "I'll always be here, Jake, in the land, in the air, in the river. You'll feel me. And I'll always carry a piece of you with me, wherever I go." Jake didn't know how to respond. He felt both comforted by her words and yet, at the same time, overwhelmed by the reality of what she was saying. She was leaving, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But somehow, Kaya's words gave him a sense of peace, as if their connection could survive even the distance between them. The silence between them stretched out, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding, with acceptance. Kaya stood up, brushing the dirt from her skirt, and Jake followed her lead, standing as well. "I'll be back tomorrow," Kaya said. "We can talk more if you want." Jake nodded, his chest tight. "I'll be here." Kaya gave him one last smile before turning to walk away. Jake watched her go, his heart heavy with the knowledge that their time together was running out. But even as she disappeared from view, he knew one thing for certain: he would never forget her. And he would always be grateful for the time they had shared, no matter how brief it might have been. The days that followed felt like a blur. Jake found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that he couldn't seem to escape. Kaya had left as she had said she would, and while he had known it was coming, the reality of her absence hit harder than he had expected. He hadn't realized just how much he had come to rely on those quiet mornings by the river, those simple exchanges with her that had slowly become the highlight of his day. Now the land around him felt emptier, more silent, even though the cattle still grazed, and the wind still howled through the mountains. Each morning, Jake would wake up early as he always did, but instead of heading toward the river to fetch water, he found himself standing still for a few moments, staring out across the land. He was waiting, but he didn't know for what. He kept telling himself that it was just a matter of time before things went back to normal, before he found his rhythm again. But nothing felt the same. There was a strange stillness in the air now, as if the world was holding its breath. It was the kind of stillness that filled the empty spaces in his mind, the spaces that Kaya had once filled. He found himself thinking about her constantly, wondering where she was, what she was doing, and if she ever thought about him the way he thought about her. He tried to keep himself busy with work. The ranch still needed his attention, the cattle still needed to be fed, and the fences still needed repairing. But no matter how hard he worked, his mind kept wandering back to the moments they had shared. He could still hear her soft laughter, still feel the warmth of her presence beside him by the river. It was like she had left a mark on his soul, one that he couldn't erase no matter how much he tried. It was on one of these quiet mornings, when the sun was barely rising and the world was still asleep, that Jake found himself standing by the river again. It had been a few days since Kaya left, and though he knew he should be focused on the work ahead, he couldn't help but be drawn to the spot where they had spent so many mornings together. He stood there for a long time, watching the water flow past him, listening to the sound of the river as it tumbled over rocks and pebbles. The silence around him was heavy, the kind of silence that felt too loud. Jake felt like he was waiting for something, though he didn't know what that something was. He stood there, rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on the flowing water until he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned around quickly, his heart racing, and there she was. Kaya, her presence was like a burst of sunlight breaking through the clouds. She was standing a few feet away, her long black hair flowing behind her in the wind, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. She had returned. And though Jake had expected her departure to feel permanent, her return was like a beacon, pulling him back to life. Kaya, Jake's voice was hoarse, as though he hadn't spoken in days. What are you doing here?" Kaya smiled softly, her eyes bright as they met his. "I had to come back," she said, her voice steady, but there was a hint of something deeper in her words. "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly." Jake felt a lump form in his throat, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with emotions that neither of them could fully express. Kaya stepped closer to him, and Jake could see the weariness in her eyes, the way her shoulders were tense, as though she carried the weight of the world on them. "I didn't expect to see you again," Jake said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "I thought you were gone for good." Kaya shook her head slowly, her gaze softening. "I wasn't gone for good," she said. "I just needed time. I needed to think." Jake watched her for a moment, trying to understand what she meant. "Think about what?" Kaya took a deep breath, her eyes closing for a moment as if searching for the right words. When she opened them again, she looked at Jake with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "About us," she said simply. "About what we have means." Jake's breath caught in his chest, and for the first time he felt like he could hear his own heart beating in his ears. He had known deep down that there was something more between them, something that neither of them had fully acknowledged, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. "Kaya," Jake began, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what to say, how to explain the emotions that were flooding through him. He had never been good at putting his feelings into words, and now, in this moment, it felt harder than ever. Kaya reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You don't need to say anything," she said softly. "I just needed to be sure about what I wanted." Jake looked at her hand on his arm and then back up into her eyes. There was a quiet understanding between them, something that neither of them had said, but both knew. This wasn't just about a fleeting connection. It was something deeper, something neither of them had expected but couldn't ignore. "I don't know what the future holds," Kaya said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I know that I don't want to lose what we have." Jake felt a surge of emotion rise up inside him. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing hers gently. "You won't lose me," he said firmly. "Not if I can help it." Kaya smiled, her eyes bright with a mixture of relief and hope. "Then we'll figure it out," she said softly. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They stood there by the river, the world around them slowly waking up. The air was cooler now, and the sun was beginning to rise higher, casting a soft golden glow over the land. Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him, the kind of peace that only comes when you've been lost for a while and finally find your way again. "I missed you," Jake said after a while, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Kaya's smile widened and she stepped closer to him. "I missed you too," she said softly, and for the first time in days, Jake felt like everything was as it should be. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let go of what they had. He wasn't going to lose her again. As the day began to unfold, they sat together by the river, talking softly, sharing their thoughts and dreams. The connection between them was stronger now, more certain. They weren't just two people brought together by chance anymore. They were two people who had found something real, something worth holding on to. The future might still be uncertain, but for the first time, Jake felt like he wasn't walking it alone. The days after Kaya's return felt different. Something had shifted between them, a new understanding that neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Jake found himself waking up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. His days on the ranch still followed the same routine, feeding the cattle, mending the fences, and making sure everything was in order. But now there was an unspoken promise between him and Kaya, a promise that no matter what happened, they would face it together. The mornings by the river were no longer just a place of quiet reflection. They were filled with conversation, shared dreams, and laughter. There were moments of silence, too, but it was no longer the heavy, aching silence it had been when Kaya had first left. It was a peaceful kind of quiet, one that came with the knowledge that they had found something real, something worth holding on to. As the days passed, they grew closer. Kaya would help Jake with the ranch work whenever she could, though she had her own responsibilities with her family. She was still navigating the complex relationship with her tribe, trying to balance her loyalty to them with her growing feelings for Jake. But she no longer felt torn between the two. She had found a way to carry both, her duty to her people and her love for Jake. Jake, for his part, had started to think about his future differently. Before, he had been content with the ranch and the quiet life he had built. But now, he began to wonder if there was more to life than just the land. He thought about Kaya's words, the way she had talked about her people, her land, and her responsibility to both. He realized that he didn't just want to stand by and watch. He wanted to be a part of it. He wanted to be there for her, not just in the quiet moments by the river, but in the challenges she faced as well. One afternoon, while they were working on the fence together, Kaya looked over at him with a thoughtful expression. "Jake, I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty, "about everything, about my people, my family, and us." Jake paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. He could tell she was working through something important. He set the tools down for a moment and turned to face her. "What is it?" he asked, his tone gentle but curious. Kaya bit her lip, clearly hesitant. "I don't know if I can do this alone, Jake," she said softly. "The pressure from the settlers, it's growing. And my people are divided. Some want to fight, some want to leave, and She stopped herself, looking down at her hands. "I don't know what to do." Jake stepped closer, his heart aching as he listened to her. He knew how much her people meant to her, how deeply she cared about them. But he also saw the toll it was taking on her, the way she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "You don't have to do it alone," Jake said quietly. "You've got me, Kaya. I'll help you however I can. We'll figure it out together." Kaya looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the truth in his words. And for the first time, Jake felt a deep sense of certainty. He had meant every word. He didn't know how they would face the challenges ahead, but he knew that he would stand by her, no matter what. For a long moment, Kaya didn't say anything. She simply looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude and something deeper, something more vulnerable. Then slowly, she nodded. "I believe you," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. The next few days were filled with planning. Jake and Kaya began to talk about their future in a way they hadn't before. They discussed what they wanted, not just for themselves but for her people as well. Kaya was determined to protect her tribe, to find a way to live in peace with the settlers while preserving the land and traditions that had been passed down through generations. Jake knew that wasn't going to be easy, but he was willing to help her fight for it. They spent hours talking, making plans, and discussing the best way forward. There were disagreements, of course, moments where they didn't see eye to eye, but those moments only brought them closer. It was in the disagreements that they truly began to understand each other, understand what they both wanted, what they both feared, and what they both needed. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake and Kaya sat down by the river, the sun just beginning to set. The air was cool, the sky painted with shades of pink and orange, and the world felt quiet again, peaceful in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we never met?" Kaya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake turned to look at her, his gaze steady. "I think about it," he said slowly, "but I don't think I'd be the man I am now if we hadn't met. You've changed everything for me, Kaya." Kaya smiled softly, her eyes glinting in the fading light. "I feel the same way," she said. "I thought I had everything figured out, but then you came along, and I realized that maybe there's more to life than just doing what's expected of me." Jake reached out and took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out," he said, his voice full of determination. "Together." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Kaya continued to work with her family, trying to find a way to unite her people, while Jake worked tirelessly on the ranch, making sure everything was in order. They continued to meet by the river, talking and planning for the future. But as the days passed, Jake started to see the toll the situation was taking on Kaya. She was more stressed, more tired, and her eyes had a faraway look to them. He knew she was trying to carry the weight of everything on her own, and he hated seeing her like this. One night after a particularly long day, Jake found Kaya sitting by the fire, her head resting in her hands. She looked up when he approached, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Kaya, you don't have to carry all of this by yourself," Jake said gently. "You don't have to do everything alone." Kaya looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. "I don't know how to stop," she whispered. "I don't know what the right thing is. What if I fail?" Jake knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "You're not going to fail," he said firmly. "And even if you did, I'd still be here. We'll face whatever comes together." Kaya's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. She simply leaned into him, and for a long while they sat there in the quiet night, holding onto each other as if the world around them had stopped spinning. The days that followed were filled with challenges, but Jake and Kaya faced them together. They found a way to balance Kaya's responsibilities to her people and their growing love for each other. There were still difficult days, still moments of doubt, but they had learned something important. Together, they could face anything. And with that realization, they began to build a future, not just for themselves, but for Kaya's people as well. As the seasons changed, so did their lives. The land around them continued to shift, just as their hearts had. And through it all, Jake knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, he and Kaya had found something real, something worth fighting for. They weren't just two people in a world full of uncertainty. They were a team, bound together by love, by shared dreams, and by the hope that no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.